In the office, the coffee has already gone cold. Someone walking past your desk says, "Lunch break's almost done. The little boxes are still waiting on screen." I'm going to show you how much retirement savings those by-age 401k screens usually assume, and why the first number you see can fool you. 401k just means the work account tied to your job for later. You think, "This was supposed to calm me down." By the end, you'll know whether your 401k is roughly on track and what to change first if it isn't. This isn't me telling you what to do with your money. I'm showing you the math so you can see what fits your life. Don't just copy-paste it. People treat the age number like clean math. It only works because a backstory is hiding underneath it. Miss that backstory, and a normal working life can start looking like a personal failure. Stay with me for the part the screen hides first. Your age is already sitting in the box. The pay field is filled in, and your current 401k balance is parked there like evidence. The coffee by your keyboard has gone cold. Half the break is already gone. Now the screen says you are behind. You open this for a number, and somehow it feels like a verdict. The nasty part is the speed. 2 seconds earlier, your paycheck was the same and your balance was the same. Then a website splashed color onto a fear that was already waiting. You think, "Please do not tell me I am already late." That lands because retirement already feels easy to miss and hard to measure. In its 2025 report on the economic well-being of U.S. households in 2024, the Federal Reserve found that 35% of non-retirees thought their retirement saving was on track. That is about 1 in 3 people. A lot of people walk into these tools already worried, and the red bar gives that worry a bright color. Once a screen makes you feel behind, the number stops behaving like a planning tool. It starts feeling like a verdict, almost like a personality test for your future. The break splits right there. Before the red bar, you were just eating at your desk. After it, the last few minutes turn into a quiet panic about whether you missed some invisible deadline years ago. That is why these tools so often feel bad before they feel useful. The color gets to you first, and the explanation shows up later in tiny gray text. You are still staring when you finally notice the small text under the result. Tiny font, low contrast, tucked exactly where your eye does not want to go. You think, "What did this thing assume about me?" That by-age target is a model. Think of it as a recipe card with hidden ingredients. Universal law is the wrong frame. Once you read it like a moral grade, it starts lying to you. The headline guide a lot of people know comes from Fidelity. It says around 1 year of pay by 30 across your retirement savings, about 3 by 40, around 6 by 50, around 8 by 60, and around 10 by 67. On an $80,000 salary, that last number is roughly $800,000. Fidelity says those milestones come from a model where you started saving at 25, put about 15% of pay a year into retirement savings, including what your job kicked in, kept more than half of that money in stocks on average over your lifetime, and aimed to stop working around 67 while keeping a similar lifestyle in retirement. On an $80,000 salary like that, 15% is about $12,000 a year into retirement savings from you and your employer together. That headline number comes with a backstory. The score on your screen came out of a recipe card. Start late or spend a few years on weak pay, and the bright little bar stops telling the clean story it promised. The target is only honest when the settings are honest. That benchmark helps. But there's a catch. It only makes sense if you borrowed the assumptions too. Maybe you did start young, and the number really is a fair checkpoint. Great, use it. But a lot of people never had that runway. If your early jobs barely covered rent, the calendar kept moving while the account sat mostly empty. Age tells you where you are. It says much less about how long your money has actually been working for you. That is why the exactness misleads you. A birthday turns into a multiple, even though the real story lives underneath it in your start date, saving rate, job stability, and stop work plan. Once you see that, the lunch break panic changes shape. The screen is comparing your life to one set of assumptions. There is another quiet distortion here. People hear these milestones and start treating the number on one screen like the whole story. Most of the time, the real question is bigger. It is the pile that will help pay for retirement wherever it sits, so one screen can make the situation look more exact than it is. The benchmark can still help. You just use it for orientation now. Are you somewhere near the ballpark for the life you want? And did the saving rate ever get a fair chance to work? Then ask whether the red bar is showing a real gap or just a mismatch between your life and the default recipe. That question is a lot healthier than asking whether a website just exposed some flaw in you during lunch. Then you tap the retirement age box. It looks harmless. Just a little drop down with a quiet calendar choice inside it. Move it a couple of years, and the whole screen changes its attitude. You think, how did one box move the mountain? Your stop work date shifts the target before you save another dollar. Pull work forward and the pile has to cover more years. Push work later, and the pressure eases because, all else equal, the money gets more time invested. The monthly Social Security check is usually bigger too if you wait longer to claim. Fidelity's own guide makes this brutally clear. In Fidelity's model, for someone aiming to keep a similar lifestyle and not counting pension income, the rough target is about 12 times pay if retirement and Social Security both start around 65. At 67, it lands around 10 times pay. Push that to 70, and the rough target drops to about 8 times pay. On an $80,000 income, that is the difference between roughly $960,000 and $640,000. The date matters on the income side too. In that same model, and assuming no pension income, savings may need to cover about half of your pre-tax pay if retirement and Social Security both start around 65, about 45% if they both start around 67, and about 40% if they both start around 70. On an $80,000 income, that is roughly $40,000 a year, then $36,000, then $32,000 before taxes. That one date can reshape the target before you save another dollar. Slide it to 70 and the bar eases. Put it back at 65 and the red tightens again, even though the balance on screen has not moved. You can feel the trick in that. A quiet drop-down turns your future calmer or more urgent just by changing the calendar. It just recolored the screen. This is the part almost nobody says out loud when they throw around age targets. The age you want to stop working is one of the main ingredients, and moving it can swing the target harder than people expect. That is why an early exit dream gets expensive fast. Claim earlier, and the pile gets less time to grow while also covering more years. Your monthly Social Security check is usually smaller too. Expect to work later, and the picture loosens up for the same reason. You get more earning and saving years and fewer years where the pile is on its own. That is why the red bar can look dramatic and then calmer 3 clicks later. So, when someone says, you should have X by your age, the missing question is right under your cursor. By whose retirement date? Comment the retirement age your calculator is using right now. A lot of people are being measured against a date they never actually chose. Now your eyes leave the red bar and drop to the box that feeds the whole thing. There is a contribution percentage sitting there. Maybe a line showing whether work chips in too. Maybe a little toggle that nudges the percentage higher over time. None of it looks nearly as dramatic as the red warning bar. That is exactly why it gets ignored. You think, I have been grading the pile and ignoring the box that feeds it. The balance you see today matters. The rate going in each paycheck usually matters more, because that is the pipe feeding the future version of the graph. Vanguard reported that participants enrolled in auto-enrollment plans with automatic annual increases were saving, on average, about 20% to 30% more after 3 years in the plan than participants in auto-enrollment plans without the annual increase. A quiet setting can outwork a motivational speech. That tiny box is steering the graph. You can see why people miss it. The graph is acting like an emergency, so the tiny auto-increase toggle and the boring match line barely register. That yearly step-up matters because it can happen while pay rises and life adjusts around it. The plan stops asking future you for one huge heroic decision in some perfect month. And notice where your eye wants to go instead. Straight to returns, to the hope that the market will bail you out. That story is louder, but the contribution box is where the boring force lives. The market can help later. The saving rate decides how much money even gets a chance to be helped. So, if the result looks light, do not stare harder at the balance. Check the percentage going in, then see whether it rises with your pay and whether you are collecting the full amount your job is willing to add. Because the graph runs on contributions. Guilt just sits there. Once you see that, the whole mood changes. The red bar stops feeling like fate because the contribution box is something you can touch before the next paycheck hits. Then you click into an old enrollment email or an old plan screen, and there it is, a starter percentage, pre-filled and quiet and official looking. The kind of number you accept in 10 seconds, then ignore for years. Sometimes it even sits beside a little green check or some cheerful line about getting started. That is all it takes for a tiny number to feel blessed. You think, if they pick that number for me, it is probably fine. That is how a default slips past your guard. It only has to look official long enough for you to stop arguing. Madrian and Shea studied what happened at one large U.S. company when it switched from opt-in 401k enrollment to automatic enrollment. Participation jumped at that company, but many workers also stayed at the default contribution rate and default fund. The paper said some of that default behavior appeared to reflect inertia and employee perceptions of the default as investment advice. A starting setting can feel like advice. Automatic enrollment gets you moving. But there's a catch. The default can leave you feeling responsible while the math stays too small. This is one of the meaner little tricks in normal money life. Payroll is taking something out, and the account exists. You are technically participating, so your brain files retirement underhandled. An official font and an HR email can do a lot of work. Add a green check, and the real question never even gets a turn. Money can move every paycheck and still leave the screen red 20 years later. That is why someone can do the respectable thing on paper and still get punched by the calculator. Sometimes they just sat in the starter setting too long. That difference gets very real in your own chest. Because enrolled can feel like the job is done even when the percentage was never big enough. The number you never picked can end up writing the forecast. That is why the phrase on track gets slippery so fast. On track for what, exactly? Which saving rate fed the plan, and how many years got spent parked in a starter setting that felt safer than it was? Which stop work age is hiding underneath it? Then real life barges onto the desk. Sometimes it is a bill from the mechanic. Other times, it is an email about layoffs. The clean graph is still on screen, and now the messy part of life is sitting beside it. You think, I need room now, I will fix this later. That reaction makes sense. The age target assumes money keeps going in and mostly stays put. Real life keeps editing the plan. In that same 2025 report, the Federal Reserve found that 14% of non-retirees borrowed from, cashed out, or reduced contributions to retirement accounts in the prior 12 months. That is about 1 out of 7 people. In the same report, 8% said they reduced their regular contributions, and 8% said they borrowed from or cashed out retirement money. Some people did both. People hit by layoffs or a major unexpected medical expense were more likely to report doing each of those things. Today's emergency can rewrite tomorrow's plan. The calculator never saw the repair bill. That is the split screen that matters. You are looking at 2 stories at once. The model is projecting a smooth timeline, while the invoice on your desk wants cash this week. Once you put those side by side, the lunch break panic makes more sense. A lot of decent people compare their jagged timeline to a model that assumes steady deposits, no panic withdrawals, and a mostly uninterrupted climb. That is not how many working lives unfold. The target is still useful, but now you read it differently. You ask whether the drift came from the settings, or whether the calendar did it, or whether life got expensive all at once. That matters because the fix depends on the reason. A weak starter percentage calls for one response, while less time before retirement changes the answer in another way. A year that blew up needs a different kind of honesty. Once you know which one you are dealing with, the next move gets calmer. The screen can scare you all at once. The useful part is knowing why. So you change the view. Instead of staring at one big balance number, you flip the screen to what that pile might actually do later. Maybe the calculator shows estimated monthly income, or maybe it shows how much of your working paycheck your savings could replace. Either way, the question finally feels real. You think, okay, now I know what this money has to do. The pile only matters because one day it has a job. It has to help pay for your future life when the paycheck from work slows down or stops. Fidelity's framework says that, assuming no pension income, savings may need to replace about 45% of your pre-tax pay if retirement and Social Security both start around 67, with Social Security covering part of the rest. On an $80,000 income, that means the savings pile may need to create around $36,000 a year before taxes. If retirement and claiming both happen around 65, Fidelity raises that savings share to about 50%. If they both happen around 70, it lowers it to about 40%. The scary balance number is future paycheck math. Once you view it that way, the screen starts explaining instead of grading. That balance target sounds like the finish line, but there's a catch. The life it can fund later is the real test. That answers the better question. The number that matters more than the balance on the screen is the income that balance could throw off later, and how close that gets you to the life you want. That is why a raw balance on one by age retirement screen can guide you and still give off the wrong emotional message. It gives you a rough checkpoint, but it does not tell you which age you meant, which saving rate fed the account, how many interruptions hit along the way, or what kind of retirement life you were trying to pay for. So take age targets like a rough map. Early markers can look decent if you really started early and kept feeding the account. Later markers say much more about steady years of saving than one lucky market year. That is why the age number can calm you down 1 minute and annoy you the next. It helps with direction, then turns fake precise the moment you forget the assumptions. And if your number looks ugly, get specific fast. A 35-year-old who started late is dealing with a different problem than a 45-year-old who spent a decade parked at a weak default. A bad layoff year changes the picture again. The screen loves to blend all of that into one red feeling. Do not let it. People waste a lot of energy feeling late in one giant emotional lump, when the useful move is to locate the actual source of the drift. If the result looks bad, start with cleanup. Set the retirement age to your best honest guess right now, instead of letting fantasy or dread pick it for you. Then look at the percentage going in and make sure it is high enough to matter. If it can rise on purpose, set that up. If you have been leaning on the default, stop giving that starter setting more authority than it deserves. Then come back to the balance and ask the adult question. What kind of monthly life could this actually support later? That question is more useful than asking whether a giant round number makes you feel safe for 10 seconds. Once the settings are honest, the target gets a lot less mysterious. Maybe you find out you are roughly fine, and the red bar loses some power. Maybe you find out you are lighter than you thought. Fine. At least now the gap has a name. Sometimes the calendar is doing it. In other cases, the contribution rate is too low, or a hard year shoved the plan sideways. Those are different problems, and they deserve different fixes. That is the part I want you to keep. At the start of this lunch break, the screen looked all-knowing. Really, it was just reading from a recipe card. Now, you know how to read the recipe back. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, because most money screens stop feeling personal once you can see the assumptions hiding underneath them. You know, the buy age number is only rough. You have also seen how much the retirement date can move the goal, and how much work the contribution setting can do. A pre-filled default can look like wisdom just because it arrived looking official. Real life can knock the plan off the clean path too. Most of all, you know what the pile is supposed to become later. Income you can live on, and more room to say no before then. That is a better question to carry out of this lunch break than some bright red verdict. Under that red bar was a settings problem, even if it felt personal. And once you stop taking the age target personally, it becomes usable. Adjust the date first. Raise the percentage next. If the default has been running your future, stop treating it like wisdom. After a hard year, rebuild without acting like the screen found some permanent flaw in you. When you understand that, the screen gets a new job. It points you to the next setting to check. That feels very different from being told your age just failed a test.